Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Thanksgiving used to mean something in our house. I'm not saying it was ever perfect. Hell, most years someone stormed out, someone else cried into their mashed potatoes, and at least once my brother-in-law fell asleep with his hand in the pumpkin pie. But it meant something. It meant home. It meant we were together. I didn't realize until that Thursday how long that had stopped being true. I'd been up since 6 that morning, peeling potatoes while the Macy's parade played in the background. The house smelled like butter, rosemary, and the kind of comfort that takes decades to build. I basted the turkey like a ritual. It was a beast this year, 20 pounds of brine perfection, and I couldn't wait to carve it. I wanted to do things right. Not for me, but for everyone else. I was stupid like that. Linda barely looked at me all morning. That wasn't new. We'd been coasting for a while, like two strangers passing each other on a long hallway with bad lighting. But something in her silence felt heavier that day. Not angry. Not cold. Just decided. I brushed it off. I thought maybe she was tired, or pissed that I forgot to pick up the good wine. It didn't matter. The kids were coming. I had a role to play. Jake arrived first, waltzing in like a guy on a podcast cover. Too loud, too sure of himself, always checking his phone like someone important might need him. He gave me a limp hug and called me Chief. I hated when he did that. He never used to. He used to run to me yelling, "Dad," when he was little. Now he smirked at me like he'd just won something I didn't know I'd bet on. Rebecca came later, still dragging her suitcase from the Uber, her cheeks red from the cold. She hugged me longer. Tighter. I remember that now more than anything else. Like maybe she already knew. She asked if I was okay, and I laughed. Of course, I said, and I meant it. I had no clue what was coming. The table looked beautiful, fall leaves, candles, the fancy plates we only used twice a year. Linda had outdone herself with the presentation. And I, idiot that I am, thought that meant something. She poured everyone a glass of wine before I could even sit. Uncle Ron made a toast. Jake made some dumb joke about crypto. We passed the rolls. And then, just as I stood to carve the turkey, she leaned in close, so close her breath warmed my neck, and whispered 6 words that cracked the world in half. After dinner, I'm leaving you. Everyone knows. I didn't look at her. I didn't blink. I just stared at the turkey, still steaming, still perfect. I saw Jake smirk out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't surprise. It was satisfaction. Like he'd been waiting for this moment. Like it was a show he helped produce. Everyone knew, except me. I gripped the carving knife so hard my knuckles went white. But I smiled. I don't even know why. I smiled like I was carving into something sacred. I sliced the bird with practiced hands, making clean cuts, placing pieces gently on the serving platter. White meat, dark meat, no one said a word. Not even Uncle Ron, which should have tipped me off that something was deeply wrong. Linda passed the gravy like she hadn't just detonated a marriage. Jake asked for the leg. Rebecca looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I asked if anyone wanted more cranberry sauce, and my voice didn't even shake. Not once. We ate. We passed dishes. We complimented the stuffing. Ron brought up football, and someone laughed. I think it was Rebecca, but it sounded all wrong. My wife and son talked around me like I was already gone. And when the plates were cleared, and everyone moved to the living room, I stood in the kitchen alone with the dishes piled high and my ears ringing. They hadn't even waited until Christmas. When the lights dimmed and the fake fire crackled on the TV, I walked to the garage, closed the door behind me, and sat in the old green lawn chair next to my toolbox. I just sat there. No radio. No light. Just the hum of the beer fridge and my own breathing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything, though God knows I wanted to. I stared at the pegboard above my workbench, tracing the outlines of tools I hadn't used in months. Wrenches, screwdrivers, a roll of duct tape, a key I didn't remember hanging there. And as I sat in that silent little tomb of mine, something clicked. They'd all planned this. Every last one of them. Not just Linda and Jake, but maybe even Ron. Maybe even Rebecca, though I hope to God not. They'd whispered behind doors and texted in threads I'd never see. They'd circled a date on a calendar I didn't get to look at. But they'd made a mistake. They forgot who built this house. They forgot who kept the lights on when the mortgage nearly buried us. They forgot who fixed the pipes, wired the fuse box, patched the roof after that damn storm in '09. They forgot who taught Jake to ride a bike, and who paid for his college tuition even after he dropped out to start a company that never started. They forgot me. But I remembered everything. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up stiff, cold, and weirdly calm. I went inside, showered, and went back to bed like nothing had happened. Linda didn't ask where I was. I don't think she even noticed. But by the next morning, I had already started the next part of the plan. The part where I vanish. The part where they find out what I'd really been doing all those late nights in the garage. The part where they realize I'm not as quiet as I seemed. And they're not invited. The funny thing about silence is that people often mistake it for surrender. Like, if you don't fight back right away, they assume you've given up. But I've always found that silence is where real planning happens, where the mind sorts the mess and sharpens into something far more dangerous than yelling ever could be. I stayed quiet that whole weekend after Thanksgiving. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had too much to do. The day after the big reveal, the Great Turkey betrayal, I woke up before the sun and pretended to go about my business. I made coffee, didn't drink it. I took a shower, but I didn't bother to shave. I nodded good morning to Linda like she hadn't gutted me with a whisper, and I even asked Jake how he slept. He gave me that same smug look, like a kid who thinks he's smarter than his teacher. I didn't respond. I just smiled. Now, here's where people usually expect some sort of blow-up. A confrontation. Some yelling in the driveway. Maybe a broken dish or two. But that's not how I was raised. I grew up in a house where pride was private and revenge was served slow and cold, usually with a side of financial paperwork. My father was a Navy man and believed a person's dignity was measured by how calmly they handled betrayal. I figured I'd honor the man. That Saturday, while Linda was out doing God knows what, probably walking and talking with someone who knew more about our finances than I ever told her, I went into the office upstairs and pulled out the dusty manila folder I hadn't touched in years. The trust documents, bank statements, the will, everything. I scanned every page like I was reading them for the first time. You ever get so familiar with something you forget how much power it actually holds? That was me with that folder. I'd written the damn documents, but even I had to marvel at how neatly they could be weaponized with a few signature updates. Our finances weren't as shared as Linda liked to believe. Years ago, after a scare with her sister's divorce, we'd moved some things around for security. I'd opened a second account in just my name. She knew about it, sure, but I don't think she ever bothered to look into it. Most people don't think about the boring details when they're planning emotional exits. They forget about the bills, the property lines, the names on the deed. Linda had forgotten. Jake? He never cared in the first place. By noon, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, logged into the joint account we'd had since the Clinton administration. Our family fund. Most of our monthly bills ran through it. It was the account we used to pay for vacations, groceries, birthdays, gifts for friends we no longer talk to. I looked at the balance, took a long breath, and started clicking. First, I canceled the automatic transfers to Linda's checking account. Then I rerouted the mortgage payment to the second account, my account. Finally, I transferred everything out. Every dollar, every cent. Except one. I left exactly $1 in the joint account. One lonely, unbothered George Washington, standing guard over an empty battlefield. Then I opened her personal account and sent that single dollar to her with the memo, "Thanks for the stuffing." Now I get it. That sounds petty. And maybe it was. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the message. Because I wanted her to know that I knew. I wanted her to feel that sting, that tiny flick to the forehead that keeps someone up at night wondering just how deep the knife actually goes. A few hours later, I heard the front door slam. Linda stormed into the kitchen like a hurricane that forgot its destination. She didn't say a word. She just held up her phone, staring at me like I was supposed to be afraid. I raised an eyebrow and asked if she liked her stuffing. She turned red. Not anger red. Embarrassed. I'd hit a nerve, and I didn't even have to raise my voice. That night, I took another walk around the house, not out of nostalgia, but out of calculation. I counted windows, measured garage space, and double-checked the safe in the closet. I was doing inventory, not memories. And when I passed the hallway mirror, I didn't recognize myself, not in a sad way, but in a strange, powerful one. I looked like a man with a plan. A man who'd already packed bags no one saw him carry. The next day was Sunday, and in our house, that used to mean pancakes and the paper. Linda cooked nothing. Jake left early without saying goodbye. I sat on the back deck with a cup of black coffee, watching the neighbors rake their leaves like everything was normal in the world. I wanted to laugh, because it was just so absurd how people go about their lives completely unaware that someone, somewhere, just had their whole future gutted like a fish. Around lunchtime, Rebecca called. She said she felt weird about the weekend. Said she couldn't shake the look on my face during dinner. I told her everything was fine. I lied, but not entirely. Because the truth is, I wasn't sad anymore. Not angry either. I'd moved past all that into a kind of stillness, like when the storm clouds clear but you haven't stepped outside yet. That quiet, weightless pause before things get real. I told her I loved her. I meant it. Then I told her not to come by the house for a while. Not until she heard from me. She asked why, and I told her the plumbing was acting up. Another lie. But sometimes lies are the only things that keep people from panicking too early. Later that afternoon, I made the first call. The one to the real estate lawyer. Told him I was ready to move forward with the Coldwater property. He sounded surprised. Said, I thought you weren't ready. I told him, oh, I'm ready now. And Harry's where I dropped the little detail someone is bound to comment on. I told the lawyer I was glad we were doing this on Wednesday, like Thanksgiving always falls on a Wednesday. Which, obviously, it doesn't. Everyone knows it's Thursday. But I didn't catch it until after I said it, and he didn't correct me either. My brain was already 4 steps ahead, running blueprints and exit strategies. Anyway, I hung up, smiled to myself, and started the garage cleanout. Because something new was coming. Something permanent. And this time, no one was going to smirk. Disappearing, it turns out, is easier than most people think, especially when the people you're disappearing from have already written you off as passive, checked out, or too weak to do anything about the crap they've been pulling. They mistake quiet for apathy, predictability for resignation. And Linda? She'd gotten so used to seeing me as background noise that she never considered I might be rehearsing my exit in plain sight. It started Monday morning. I got up before dawn, as usual, packed a bag with just enough to not raise suspicion, and moved through the house like a ghost with a checklist. I took only what mattered, my passport, some cash I'd slowly withdrawn over the past few weeks, my laptop, a lockbox with original house documents, and my father's pocket knife, which hadn't seen daylight since he passed away in '98. I didn't take clothes beyond what would fit in my truck's toolbox. Didn't take photos. No goodbye notes. Just what I needed and what I'd earned. By the time Linda got up and started her morning routine, the one where she spends 30 minutes pretending to care about emails and another 30 scrolling through group chats about other people's grandkids, I was already gone. I left the coffee machine on like I'd just stepped out to the store. Left the porch light on, too, which I knew would bug her. She hated that, always said it made us look like we were waiting for someone who never showed. I didn't go far at first. Just far enough. There's a cheap motel about 20 miles west of town, off the highway, tucked behind a closed-down bait shop and a liquor store that sells the kind of whiskey even teenagers won't steal. I'd booked a room under a name close enough to mine that I wouldn't forget it, but far enough that it wouldn't be obvious. Paid in cash. No questions asked. From that room, musty carpet, flickering lamp, but solid walls, I began to watch it all unfold. First came the texts from Rebecca. Polite, casual, but slightly off. Hey, Dad, just checking in. Everything okay? Then a voicemail from Jake that sounded more annoyed than concerned. You didn't say where you were going. Mom's kind of freaking out. Call back or whatever. He always had a way of making everything about him, even someone else's disappearance. I didn't answer either of them. Let the silence grow. By Tuesday evening, I knew Linda had reached that critical stage of panic that only shows up when someone realizes their plan didn't go according to script. She tried to call me 4 times in 1 hour, then switched to emails, each one a little more frantic than the last. The final one just said, "Tom, where the hell are you? This isn't funny." I smiled when I read that one. Because no, it wasn't funny. Not even a little bit. What it was intentional. Wednesday morning, the real one, not the imaginary Thanksgiving Wednesday I somehow invented last week in my lawyer's office, I sent a letter. Not an email, not a text. A real, stamped, handwritten letter, postmarked from a town they'd never think to check. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 sentences. I'm fine. Don't call the police. Everything I took was mine. Check the safe. That was it. Back at the house, I knew it would take Linda a minute to realize what that last line meant. Because I knew her routine. She'd read it. Scoff. Probably accuse me of being dramatic. Then, curiosity would get the better of her. She'd go upstairs, open the closet, punch in the code, and swing open the little gray door behind the coats. Only to find the safe was empty. No insurance documents. No property deeds. No copy of our prenuptial agreement. No key to the safety deposit box we opened after my brother's accident. Just an old pair of reading glasses and a Bible she hadn't touched in years. That's when the first wave of real fear probably hit her. And then, exactly as I predicted, she called the cops. I wasn't watching it happen, but I might as well have been. I imagined it all as clearly as if I were in the room. The officers at the front door, their calm, practiced questions. When did you last see him? Any known medical issues? Could he be a danger to himself? And Linda, stumbling through answers, trying to figure out how to make it sound like she cared without admitting she'd told me she was leaving 2 days before. I imagined Jake sitting in the corner, arms crossed, muttering that I was probably just off sulking, or being dramatic, or teaching them a lesson, which, to be fair, I was. But then, according to Rebecca, who I'd asked to text me updates under the radar, things took a turn. One of the cops asked to look at our financials, just to rule out anything suspicious. Linda pulled up the joint account, still confused about why it said 0. And there, right at the top of the transaction list, was that $1 transfer with the message, "Thanks for the stuffing." Apparently, one of the officers left. Not in a mean way, just surprised. Said, "Well, that's a new one." Rebecca told me Linda didn't laugh. By Thursday, my disappearance had officially become an incident. A report was filed. My face and name were passed around town. I kept low. Didn't use my debit card. Didn't call anyone but Rebecca, and, even then only once, using a prepaid burner phone I'd picked up weeks ago in anticipation of exactly this. That day, as I sat on the motel bed flipping through a newspaper I didn't care about, I realized something strange. I didn't miss the house. I didn't miss the routine. I didn't even miss the people, at least not the versions of them I'd last seen. What I missed was the idea of it all. The illusion of family. The version of us that existed maybe 15 years ago, before Jake got too cool, before Linda stopped saying my name like it meant something, before every meal turned into a negotiation. I missed a ghost. And you can't live with ghosts. Late that night, I got another message from Rebecca. It just said, "Mom's freaking out. They realized the life insurance is in your name only. And you changed the beneficiary." She followed up with a question I didn't answer. "Dad, where are you?" But she didn't need to worry. Because I was safe. More than that, I was free. And tomorrow, I was headed to Coldwater Road. Coldwater Road wasn't anything special from the outside. If you drove by it fast, you wouldn't even notice the gravel shoulder or the faded wooden sign half covered in ivy. There's no mailbox, no driveway gate, just a narrow path that winds through the trees like it's trying to hide from everyone who doesn't belong. That's exactly why I picked it. No one in the family ever cared about that part of the county. Too far from the city. Too quiet. Too boring. Which made it perfect for me. I bought the land 8 years ago under a business name that meant nothing to anyone, just some generic LLC that would slide under radar and taxes without raising a single eyebrow. Back then, I told Linda it was part of a job I was bidding on for a buddy. She didn't ask questions. She never really asked about the work once the money showed up on time. That was always her measure. If the bills were paid, she figured everything was fine. Over time, I started building. Not fast. Not all at once. A foundation poured one summer, framing the next, wiring and plumbing in the fall when the ground got hard enough to keep the structure settled. I'd bring materials out in a trailer, sometimes only what I could fit in the bed of the truck, never more than what looked like scrap or leftovers from a job. If anyone saw me, they probably thought I was just storing things out there, maybe fixing up a hunting cabin. I never corrected them. It wasn't a lie if nobody asked. What I built wasn't fancy, but it was strong. 1 bedroom, 1.5 baths, concrete floors with radiant heat, solar panels on the south side, a well dug deeper than it needed to be. There was a wood stove I restored myself and a rainwater catch system I pieced together out of stubbornness more than need. It was everything I didn't realize I wanted until I started losing the things I thought I couldn't live without. I never told anyone about the place. Not Linda. Not Jake. Not even Rebecca. But Rebecca had always known I had places I went when things got heavy. She used to call them Dad's hideouts, like I was some secret superhero trying to dodge family drama instead of bills and arguments about dishwasher brands. So when she called Linda that Thursday afternoon, crying hard enough her voice cracked like dry leaves, it wasn't because she couldn't guess where I was. It was because she finally started to understand why. She had called me first. I let it ring. Then she texted. I told her she shouldn't have said what she did. She didn't mean it like that. Please, can we talk? I didn't answer. Not because I was angry at her, far from it, but because I knew anything I said now would pull her deeper into something she didn't start. She was the only one who still had a piece of my trust left, and I wanted to protect that, even if it meant staying silent a little longer. Meanwhile, back at the house, things were unraveling fast. According to what Rebecca later told me, Linda had gone full meltdown mode when the insurance officer called to confirm that not only had I changed the policy beneficiary, but I'd done so weeks ago. All legal. All above board. No fraud. No disputes. Just a quiet little signature filed on a Tuesday morning while she was out buying scented candles and overpriced shampoo. Jake, ever the opportunist, apparently started pushing for power of attorney. He claimed I was unstable. Said maybe I'd wandered off with early dementia. Linda backed him, not because she believed it, but because she realized they'd screwed up and wanted control of what was left. But control was never theirs to begin with. They'd built their entire strategy on the assumption that I'd just roll over. They never considered I might actually get up and leave. When the lawyer called to confirm the final transfer of the Coldwater property into a secondary trust under my name and Rebecca's, just ours, no one else, he sounded almost proud. Said, most people don't think this far ahead. They wait until they're in the hospital or some crisis hits. You planned this down to the nail. I told him he wasn't wrong. But he didn't even know the half of it. Because while Linda was scrambling to call banks and Jake was calling lawyers trying to find a loophole, I was finishing the final touch on the place I'd started building all those years ago. I stood on the porch with a coffee in hand, watching the fog roll in from the trees, and I realized I wasn't hiding. I wasn't even retreating. I was reclaiming. And let me tell you something strange. It wasn't satisfying in the way people expect revenge to be. It wasn't fireworks or grand speeches or slamming doors. It was better. It was peaceful. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the absence of pain where pain used to be. Sometimes it's the silence after years of yelling. That night, I finally answered Rebecca's text. Just 3 words. Come see me. She arrived 2 days later. Eyes wide, face pale, tears just behind the corners of her eyelids. She stepped inside, looked around, and said, "This is beautiful. You built this for yourself?" I nodded. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. We talked for hours. I told her what had happened. All of it. From Linda's whisper behind the turkey to Jake's smirk to the dollar transfer with that stupid memo. She listened, then she cried, then she laughed. That laugh saved me. It was the same one she used to have when she was 10 and couldn't stop giggling at her own knock-knock jokes. But when I told her I didn't want her to tell them where I was, not yet, maybe not ever, she got quiet. They're going to hate me for this, she said. I told her they probably would. But they already made their choice. And then she said it. Said the thing that would crack the rest of the story wide open. Dad, you didn't just leave them, you replaced them. I didn't say anything. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest confession you can make. And when she called her mother later that night, voice shaking, holding my hand while the wind howled against the trees, all I heard was, "Mom, what did you do?" The first time Linda drove out to Coldwater Road, she didn't even know she was looking for me. That's the part that still makes me chuckle, even now. She thought she was following a breadcrumb trail to something she could control, or maybe even undo. The idea that I had simply disappeared, that I could detach from everything we'd built together and live without them, just didn't compute for her. But when she finally pulled up that narrow path, tires crunching over gravel like teeth grinding in their sleep, and saw the house at the end of it all, she understood. It wasn't about hiding. It was about leaving them behind, deliberately and unapologetically. The house was finished by then. The wood was sealed, the glass cleaned, the walls painted in shades of warm earth and cooler grays that didn't try too hard to impress, but somehow did anyway. Every piece of furniture inside had been picked by me or built by my hands. Nothing left over, nothing borrowed. It wasn't a second chance home, it was a first choice I'd been quietly working toward while they were busy plotting how to exile me from the life I created. Linda's car didn't come up the driveway right away. I watched it from the porch, standing still with a mug of coffee, knowing she wouldn't get out until she was sure I wasn't going to come down and drag her away from the property. She had this look, like she couldn't decide if she should apologize or scream, and it reminded me of every fight we never really finished over the years. Rebecca was already inside, organizing books and humming under her breath like she belonged there. Because she did. She was the only one who ever asked me how I was doing when no one else thought I mattered anymore. When I told her about the trust, how I rewrote it the morning after Thanksgiving while everyone else was sleeping off the stuffing and the betrayal, she cried. Not because she wanted anything from it, but because she couldn't believe I had thought of her in a moment when I could have easily cut everyone out. The trust was airtight. Signed, notarized, and updated through the lawyer who'd known me since the days I was still hanging drywall and eating lunch out of a cooler in the back of my pickup. It left the house on Coldwater Road solely to me and Rebecca. No room for debate. No room for accidental claims. Linda and Jake were officially, permanently, and legally out. Jake, according to Rebecca, hadn't taken it well. In fact, he'd accused her of turning on the family, like this was some corporate merger gone south instead of a personal implosion he helped engineer. He even tried calling the lawyer to contest the changes, only to be told, quite plainly, that he had no standing. That was the word that broke him, no standing. Not in court, not in the will, not in my life. Linda, for her part, had gone from panic to rage to this weird kind of dignified denial, telling people that I just needed some space, like I was camping out in a hotel and planning to come home any minute. But the day she showed up at the Coldwater house, she stopped using that story. Because when she looked at the place, when she saw how complete it was, how ready it was to replace everything she thought I still needed from her, she got it. She stepped out of the car eventually, walking slow like the ground might betray her, and I didn't move to greet her. I didn't even say a word. She looked at me from the base of the porch stairs and said, "So this is it?" I sipped my coffee, nodded once. She said, "You didn't have to make it this way." And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I actually laughed out loud. Not bitter, not mocking, just real, full-bodied laughter, the kind that comes from a deep place of disbelief and catharsis. Because of all the things she could have said, an apology, an explanation, a plea for understanding, that was the one she picked. I said, "Linda, I didn't make it this way." "You did." She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. Because what could she possibly say that would undo the fact that they had already counted me out? That they'd written me off before the turkey was even on the table? That Jake had smirked like the villain in a bad soap opera while I quietly served them a meal they didn't deserve? She asked if she could come inside. I said no. Not angry. Not spiteful. Just matter of fact. You're not on the deed, I said. You're not invited. She stood there for another minute, maybe two, looking past me into the house like maybe she could see the version of her life that had slipped away. Maybe she saw the photos Rebecca had already hung, the blankets folded neatly, the shelves full of tools and books I loved. Maybe she realized that none of it included her anymore and never would again. She didn't cry. She just turned and walked back to her car, slower than when she'd arrived. And when she drove away, she didn't look back once. Inside, Rebecca asked if I was okay. I told her I'd never been better. The Coldwater house doesn't have a TV. We don't need one. We read. We build. Sometimes we sit on the porch and say nothing for hours, watching the trees sway and the sky change colors like it owes us something beautiful. I don't know what the future holds for Rebecca, and I won't pretend I've got everything figured out now. But I do know one thing with absolute certainty. I was never lost. I didn't run. I rebuilt. And the people who never bothered to ask me what I needed, who plotted behind smiles and served betrayal with dessert, they aren't just gone. They're disinherited. In every sense of the word. And they're not invited back. Not now. Not ever.